This is the 400-year judgment. Voices of the diaspora. We're returning the receipts. The Reverend Point Blank is in the building. Welcome to CHUCH.
Talk to me about power. Why do the powerful and the people that do horrible things fall the loudest? Because elevation amplifies impact. The higher the stage, the louder the collapse.
Chances and choices.
Hello and welcome to the Ticket to the Nine. This is where we bring vision to those who may be blind. Please understand, this is not about Donald Trump or Barack Obama's schism. This here, my friend, is about flat-out systematic racism. And more than half of Americans voted for him. Maybe they just didn't know. Or maybe they were a part of the show. Please don't get mad, I'm just keeping it tight. I'm not judging you, hell, that's your voters' right. Some of our grandparents had to die for this fight. It doesn't matter how you look at it, it ain't right. Thanks for watching, I'm the Reverend Point Blank, and everywhere I go, it's the politics that stink. I assume this was the people's house. And for many years, well, I've had my doubt. But what if the tables were turned around? Oh, hell, I think they'd grab Obama and put him in jail. So what if the man from Chicago's streets, who spoke of hope and rhythmic beats, what if he had walked the path that 45 chose and traded his poise for the statue of foes? What if he had stood on Grant Park's stage and fueled a fire of digital rage? What if he had called the press the enemy's tongue while the weight of the world on his shoulders hung? What if he told 30,000 lies with a straight-faced look and a spark in his eyes? What if he had mocked a man's physical trait or opened a door to the big lie's weight? What if he had withheld an aid to a nation of war to settle a grudge or even the score? Would the city that raised him still stand by his side or be lost in the tide? What if he had been in peace not once but twice, paying for chaos the ultimate price? What if he had summoned a crowd to the Capitol's gate to challenge the law and the hand of fate? This is the Ticket to the Nine, where we demand the truth, from the wisdom of age to the fire of our youth. What if my friend had broken the seal? The world would have stopped the spin of the wheel. For some get a pass, and others get checked. But a great foundation is built on the foundation of respect. What if the tables were turned around? Would the silence of justice be only sound? You know, this is the type of crap that's been going on for far too long. So to make myself kind of feel better, well, hell, I created a song. And for the record, Barack Obama was a great president under the 400-year circumstance. Peace and love.
What if the table was turned? What if the man from the Chicago streets who spoke of hope and rhythmic beats had walked the path that 45 chose and traded his poise for the status of foes? What if he'd stood on that Grant Park stage and fueled a fire of digital rage? If he'd called the press the enemy's tongue while the weight of the world on his shoulders hung? What if he told 30,000 lies with a straight-faced look and a spark in his eyes? If he'd mocked a man for a physical trait or opened the door to the big lie's weight? If he'd withheld the aid to a nation at war to settle a grudge and even the score? Would the city that raised him still stand at his side, or would the blueprint be lost in the tide? If he'd been impeached not once but twice, paying for chaos the ultimate price? If he'd summoned a crowd to the Capitol's gate to challenge the law and the hand of fate, the ticket to the nine demands the truth, from the wisdom of age to the fire of youth. If the Reverend's friend had broken the seal, the world would have stopped the spin of the wheel. For some get a pass while others get checked, but legacy's built on the foundation of respect. What if the table was turned around? The silence of justice would be the only sound.
Walking into a packed Really dimly lit room, right? The air is thick, the crowd is super restless, and someone just steps right up to the microphone.
Oh man, yeah, like you can just feel the tension in the air.
Exactly. And, they aren't there to give some sanitized political speech or read from a dusty history book. It's more like they're ringing a metaphorical bell. Like they are acting as this modern day town crier, just reading out a ledger of a society's deepest, most visceral anxieties in real time.
Yeah, right in the moment.
Right. So you are experiencing history not as cold facts, but as this living, breathing, emotional crisis. And today you're joining us for a deep dive into that exact kind of raw historical record.
It's really something else.
It totally is. We are unpacking a piece of modern political spoken word poetry. It's called The Truth Stumbles in the Empire of Lies. And it's written by an author known as the Reverend Point Blank from the platform We Jus Chillin.
And, to truly understand a piece of art like this, we have to look past the surface level words, right? We have to examine the underlying machinery of how it's built.
The nuts and bolts of it.
Exactly. Political poetry, it serves as a real-time reflection of cultural friction. So we're looking at the specific rhetorical devices, the cognitive triggers, and just the architectural choices the author uses to construct this entire narrative.
But wait, before we venture one step further, we really need to lay down a crucial ground rule for you, the listener, because, this source material is heavily, heavily politically charged.
Oh, yeah, extremely.
I mean, it explicitly critiques Donald Trump and very heavily praises Barack Obama. And as your guides on this deep dive, we are absolutely not taking sides.
No, not at all.
Right. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the author, and we aren't validating the political claims or, historical interpretations made in the poem. Our mission today is entirely impartial.
We're basically just pulling the poem apart, right? Just to understand how it attempts to persuade its audience. Totally, regardless of where any of us might fall on the political spectrum.
Exactly. So, getting right into it, I think the author actually tells us how they want us to receive this persuasion right in the very first lines, don't they?
They really do. They introduce themselves as the Reverend Point Blank from the Voices of the Diaspora's Light, and then they just follow it with this command. It's, welcome to church, where we speak truth tonight.
Wow.
Yeah, so they totally bypass the entire concept of a political debate right from the jump.
That opening completely reframes your expectations as a listener. I mean, if you are invited to a debate, your guard goes up.
Right, you get ready to argue.
You're prepared to fight, yeah.
Yeah.
But when the town crier suddenly transforms into a reverend and the town square transforms into a literal church, the whole dynamic shifts.
He really does.
Framing a list of political grievances as a sermon claims this immediate moral high ground. It's like the author is signaling, hey, what follows isn't a mere disagreement over policy. This is a battle between righteous truth and absolute sin.
Yeah, you aren't being asked to consider a perspective. You're being commanded to bear witness. And the psychology behind that framing is incredibly potent.
Right.
Because, a sermon demands reverence. It requires the congregation to kind of suspend their standard partisan skepticism and adopt this posture of receiving wisdom.
Right, you're sitting in the pews, basically.
Exactly. By putting on that mantle of a reverend, the author changes the currency of the conversation from political capital to spiritual authority. And once they have you seated in that church, they immediately open their scroll and start reading this ledger of what they call the Empire of Lies, starting from that January dawn, which signifies Donald Trump's inauguration.
Right, so the crier starts ringing the bell, and they list this rapid-fire series of factual disputes. And what really stands out to me is how highly specific these grievances are. Like, the author doesn't just say the former president was dishonest.
No, they get super granular.
Yeah. They anchor the accusation in very measurable flashpoints. For example, they bring up this claim about gas prices being $2.99, and they directly counter it with the stated reality of $5.78.
Which is such a specific number.
Totally. And then it shifts to public health.
Yeah.
The poem contrasts Trump's kind of dread-raising political rhetoric around the fentanyl crisis with numbers from the CDC that supposedly told a completely different story.
And then the ledger just broadens out from there into these massive geopolitical and social issues. Like the author brings in the origins of the war in Ukraine, claiming Trump pinned the conflict on a deal gone wrong, while asserting that European allies actually provided more support.
Right.
Then they move on to voting rights, criticizing the push for single-source voter rolls. They emphasize how civil rights advocates really had to stand up against that. And finally, they dive into the justice system, pointing to the whole Jeffrey Epstein case.
Oh, right, calling it a hoax.
Yeah, criticizing the dismissal of the tale as a hoax and claiming this fundamentally shook public trust in justice.
But look at the sheer variance in the types of evidence being presented here. I mean, on one end of the spectrum, you have the exact down to the penny cost of a gallon of gas. It's a number every single listener understands because they feel it in their own wallet, right?
It's an everyday thing.
But then on the other end, you have the convoluted multinational origins of the Ukraine conflict or the systemic impact of voter roll management. The author just weaves these totally disparate elements together into a single thread.
It's fascinating.
The town crier is essentially blending the hyper-specific with the incomprehensibly vast. How does that even work as a persuasive tool?
Well, that blending is actually a masterclass in a psychological concept known as the anchoring effect, combined with what we call processing fluency.
Oh, okay. Break that down for me.
Sure. So when you give an audience a very precise number, like $5.78 for gas, it feels undeniably tangible. It establishes a baseline of concrete reality. The brain just naturally accepts this specific detail as a hard truth.
Because it sounds so exact, you assume it's well-researched.
Exactly. And once that anchor is set, the author quickly pivots to abstract, highly subjective interpretations of complex geopolitics. But because the brain has already accepted the premise of the gas price, it extends this sort of halo of truth over the broader assertions about Ukraine or the Epstein case.
Oh, wow. And the rhythmic nature of spoken word poetry actually acts as a cognitive bypass here, doesn't it? Like, if you read these claims in a standard political op-ed, your brain might naturally pause at the end of a paragraph to fact-check the connection between a gas price and a foreign war.
Yeah, you'd stop and say, wait a minute, how do those relate?
Right. But poetry doesn't give you that pause. The cadence acts like this forward momentum, just pushing you on to the next line before your critical defenses can fully engage. You're so swept up in the rhythm, so you just accept the entire ledger as a single cohesive truth.
The medium is absolutely the message here. The delivery of spoken word relies completely on urgency. The poet is using momentum to build this overwhelming sense of grievance. By stacking domestic economics, public health, international relations, and criminal justice, one right after another, the poem makes this empire of lies feel entirely inescapable.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, it isn't just a distant political issue. It's presented as a structural rot that touches every single facet of the listener's daily existence.
And that overwhelming momentum is so crucial because the author uses it to slingshot the listener into the next major section of the poem. Once they've defined the weight of this empire, they introduce their central rhetorical device.
Right, to magnify the hypocrisy of it all.
Exactly. The town crier completely changes their tune. They pivot from this relentless prosecution of Trump into an extensive hypothetical thought experiment centered entirely around Barack Obama.
Yeah, and the author sets up this comparison by first highlighting Obama's unique background.
Yeah.
They explicitly note his story, being born in Hawaii, being a citizen, and they make the claim that his truth wasn't counted like Trump's tallies were kept.
Which establishes the baseline for the double standard they're about to explore.
Right.
The poem then launches into this incredibly rhythmic barrage of what-ifs. And the brilliance of the structure here is that these hypothetical questions map perfectly back onto the exact ledger we just unpacked.
It's so deliberate.
It forces you to revisit the entire list, but through a totally different lens. It asks, what if Obama had spun false words about gas prices being $1? What if he had inflated fentanyl deaths? Would Congress have moved, or just let it slide?
And the barrage just continues relentlessly. What if Obama claimed Ukraine sparked a war's flame? Would alliances shatter? What if he called mail-in ballots fraud?
Or called the Epstein case a hoax?
Exactly. Would public trust in the courts crumble? The author is basically demanding that the listener run a mental simulation, grafting the exact actions of one leader onto the persona of another.
It even pushes past policy and into behavioral norms, which is a fascinating escalation. The poem asks, what if Obama had acted like a unitary king, bending the Constitution to his will? What if he fired thousands of workers and replaced them in haste? And finally, what if he grabbed a woman in a moment of shame?
Yeah, would calls for his removal consume his legacy?
Right, so what is going on psychologically with this role reversal?
Well, in cognitive psychology, what the author is employing here is called the double standard heuristic. By taking norm-breaking behavior and superimposing it on a figure from the opposite end of the political spectrum, the poet forces the audience to confront their own systemic biases.
And again, the rhythm amplifies the effect.
Oh, absolutely. The repetitive drumbeat of what if creates this compounding emotional weight. It turns individual political complaints into this massive overarching narrative of systemic institutional hypocrisy.
I have to apply some friction to this rhetorical strategy, though, because this entire what if section feels like a massive gamble by the author. It relies entirely on a very specific pre-existing assumption about the media landscape.
How so?
Well, the thought experiment only really works if you, the listener, inherently believe that Congress and the press would have absolutely destroyed Obama for those exact actions. The author is assuming the media was hostile or at least fiercely objective toward Obama. But if a listener comes into this poem believing that the media was actually highly favorable or even protective of Obama, this entire role reversal just collapses, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's incredibly insightful. The structural vulnerability of the poem lies precisely in that assumption. Political poetry, it often functions more as a mirror for the in-group than a window for the out-group.
Oh, I like that. A mirror, not a window.
Right. For a listener who already feels a deep sense of grievance regarding racial or political double standards, this litany of questions is profoundly cathartic. It provides a structured, highly rhythmic articulation of their internal frustration. It validates their existing worldview.
So it's the Reverend preaching to the choir. It rallies the congregation who already walked into the church completely believing in the sermon.
Exactly. But for someone sitting outside the church, someone who views the historical relationship between the press and the Obama administration completely differently, the thought experiment might read as defensive or just inherently flawed.
Yeah, it doesn't invite them to critically evaluate their own stance. It risks alienating them entirely because the foundational premise just doesn't match their reality.
And that is the inherent risk of political art. It rarely persuades the unconvinced. What it does do, however, is galvanize the convinced. It gives them a cohesive narrative architecture. And, even if the listener pushes back on the premise, the sheer volume of the hypothetical controversies forces them to engage with the magnitude of the author's grievance.
You cannot ignore the size of the ledger, even if you dispute its accounting.
Beautifully put, yes.
And just as the listener is absorbing the sheer weight of these behavioral comparisons, the crier, rolls up that scroll and pulls out another one. The poem shifts gears from the theoretical to the tangible.
Right, this is a big turning point.
Yeah, the author is making a crucial pivot here. They are arguing that these lies and rhetorical games aren't just acty words evaporating in the town square. They are concrete tools used to physically reshape the world. The poem transitions into outlining the permanent structural damage attributed to the Trump era.
So we move from diagnosing the character of the leadership to diagnosing the physical impact on the country itself. Mm-hmm. The poet lists a completely different kind of ledger here, focusing on legacy policy items. Mm-hmm. They point to tax cuts for the wealthy, arguing that the financial future of the country was permanently recast. They invoke this really stark imagery regarding immigration policies, visualizing walls built tall and families separated cries in the hall.
And they bring up international relations, mentioning the pulling out of treaties and portraying allies as shaken, causing global alliances to split. Plus, the poem touches heavily on long-term institutional shifts, specifically the federal courts.
Right, the judicial system.
Yeah, the author describes a conservative wave of judicial decisions designed to echo long after the grave. And then it wraps up this section by pointing to climate denial and trade wars, asserting that these stances caused real markets to waver and cost actual jobs.
The author is meticulously documenting the conversion of political rhetoric into systemic reality. They are demonstrating how words spoken in the abstract manifest as physical walls, severed treaties, and lifetime judicial appointments.
The way I sort of conceptualize this transition is it's the difference between a temporary bruise and a permanent scar.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, like for the first half of the poem, the author is complaining about the bruises. A politician's rhetoric, a misstated fact about gas prices, an inflammatory social media post. Those are bruises. They are ugly, they hurt in the moment, but eventually the skin heals and they fade.
Right.
But shifting the ideological balance of the courts for an entire generation, pulling out of international climate treaties, building physical walls, those are permanent scars on the body politic. The author is warning the listener that the bruises were just distractions while the scars were being inflicted.
That bruise versus scar analogy perfectly captures the structural escalation of the poem. But, it also reveals something fascinating about how the author is manipulating language itself.
How so?
Well, in the beginning of the piece, the word lie meant a measurable, factual inaccuracy like saying gas was one price when it was actually another.
Right.
But by the time we reach this section on policy, the definition of a lie has fundamentally expanded.
Oh, I see what you mean. The author starts blurring the line between objective falsehoods and just, well, standard partisan policy.
Exactly.
Let's look at tax cuts for the wealthy or appointing conservative judges. Regardless of how anyone feels about those actions, they are not objectively lies.
Right.
They are standard foundational pillars of conservative political ideology. Millions of voters actively advocate for those exact outcomes. But the poem wraps these policies in the exact same rhetorical package as a dispute over crowd sizes or election fraud.
The author actually redefines the social contract to make their point here. From the poet's perspective, the empire of lies isn't merely about misstating data.
Yeah.
It's about a governing philosophy that they believe fundamentally betrays the public trust.
Wow.
Yeah. By conflating ideological differences with active deception, the poet elevates standard political disagreement into an existential moral crisis. Implementing a policy you vehemently disagree with becomes an act of corruption against the truth itself.
That really raises the stakes of the town crier's message. They are no longer just saying, hey, we disagree on how to balance the budget. They are shouting, we are in a war over the very nature of reality and justice.
And that fever pitch is exactly what brings us to the outro of the poem, where the Reverend delivers their final altar call to the congregation.
Right. After painting this incredibly bleak picture of a fractured land, the poet demands agency from the listener. They issue a direct challenge. Now you decide what's right or wrong. You agree with what's going on.
They're putting it all on you.
Yeah. The author tells the audience, point blank, do something and try to make it right. All of this darkness will come to light. It is a demand for movement, an insistence that the listener cannot simply be a passive consumer of history. You are asked to pick up the tools and fix the scars.
And then, and I think this is one of the most fascinating structural choices in the entire piece, after dragging the listener through this apocalyptic imagery of broken treaties, trembling justice, and empires of lies, the author signs off with a completely jarring phrase.
Oh my goodness, yes.
They literally just end with, peace and love, we just chillin'.
It is absolute cognitive whiplash.
It really is.
Yeah.
But that sudden shift in tone serves a highly specific purpose in spoken word culture. It grounds the towering political analysis back into the body of the human being who is actually holding the microphone.
Okay, that makes sense.
The artist is reminding the room that despite the immense burden of the geopolitical chaos they just described, they are still rooted in their local community. It is a declaration of resilience. It's a way of saying, we have documented the damage, we see the empire for what it is, but we refuse to let it consume our humanity.
The crier steps down from the soapbox, rings the bell one last time, and simply walks back into the crowd as a regular citizen. It's a really powerful deflation of the tension they spent the entire poem building up.
It leaves the listener with the emotional residue of the argument, but it releases them from the immediate urgency of the performance.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. As the Reverend was wrapping up their sermon, they noted that truth kept a ledger we couldn't ignore. Throughout this deep dive, we've carefully unpacked the specific ledger this author chose to keep. We looked at their math, their hypothetical simulations, and their definition of a scar.
But the reality of our modern town square is much, much more complicated.
No, vastly more.
Different political factions aren't just arguing over how to interpret a single ledger. They're keeping entirely different ledgers altogether. They have different timelines, different flashpoints, and different definitions of what even constitutes a crisis.
Exactly. So imagine those future historians we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive. When they look back at our era, they won't just find a single objective textbook. They're going to find thousands of passionate, beautifully constructed, utterly contradictory spoken word poems.
It's gonna be wild.
Right. When the town criers in every corner of the square are shouting completely different versions of the absolute truth, the historical record becomes this labyrinth of competing realities.
And navigating that labyrinth requires profound media literacy. It demands that we interrogate not just the claims being shouted, but the rhythm of the shouting itself. We have to recognize when our own cognitive defenses are being bypassed by, a clever heuristic or an emotional anchor.
So, as you navigate your own information ecosystem today, consider how you maintain your personal ledger. What facts do you choose to ink into the permanent record, and what claims do you just leave in pencil? Because the reality is, every time you open a feed or listen to a broadcast, you are walking into someone's church.
You are listening to their sermon.
And ultimately, you are the one who has to decide what the truth actually is.
Check the frequency, I'm tuning out the static noise. Disconnected from the matrix, I don't play with toys. I'm talking nine, ether headcore like the galaxy. Conducting cosmic energy, defying every gravity. My DNA is ancient, coded in the carbon sun. The triple black melanin, the work is never done. I'm sitting in the stillness, watch the ego start to fade. I'm the master of the temple, I'm the light within the shade. Open up the third eye, see the world in HD. I'm soaring through the plains, nobody gonna cage me. Astral project and leave the vessel on the bed. I'm conversing with the ancients, exactly what they said. From the third to the fifth, we ascending through the mist. Spirit over matter, yeah, we know we exist. Step into the fourth dimension, time is just a loop. I'm flying past the planets, loop the looping through the group of the constellations. Yeah, I'm visiting the Pleiades, solving all the mysteries and curing the diseases of the mind locked in a box. Thinking that the flesh is all, but I'm a spiritual giant watching every empire fall. Silver cord attached, yeah, I'm anchored to the physical, but my consciousness is infinite, the vision is biblical. Pineal gland calcified, now I keep it rinsed. I've been awake and lucid ever since I was a prince of the universe. The center of the atom is the throne. I'm never feeling lonely, I'm just vibing on my own. Seven density, I'm feeling like a wave of light. No more shadows in the valley, everything is shining bright. I'm the dreamer in the dream, I'm the ocean in the drought. Once you activate the crown, the evolution doesn't stop. From the root to the lotus, feel the kundalini rise. Burn the veil of the illusion, look 'em straight inside the eyes. We ain't human having spirits, we are spirits having human. The nine ether rising, yeah, the garden is a blooming. Stay woke. Beyond the physical, vibrate higher. See you in the astral plane.
This is the 400-year judgment. Voices of the diaspora. We're returning the receipts.